Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of Performance Insights. Some developments since I saw you last month. On our website now, we have an on-demand feature where you can actually watch the lectures again. So last week's is up there, and after our good man Todd in the back here is our audiovisual man gives me the one for today. We'll put that up also. So go to the main page, and you'll see a banner there about Performance Insights. Click on the Performance Insights tab, and it'll take you to the page, and then you can see where it's a YouTube link. Just click on that. This is the last one I'll be giving this year. I'll start up again next year at the first concert. And this is going to be a concert that you will not want to miss. It's the first time that Coastal Concerts is presenting an orchestra. So tell your friends. It's going to be a great concert, and I'll be giving the lecture then also. Plus, another addition for next year, starting next year, is a partnership with the Curtis Institute, where we will have alumni, faculty, and students come down and perform for us. One extra concert per year, so we're expanding the season to include what we're going to call Spotlight on Curtis. Now today, since we have a horn player here and features prominently in the pieces, I thought, well, do like I did last month, but this month, History of the Horn. La trompe de chasse, the hunting horn. This was an instrument that is very old, and it was used during the hunt. The person on the horse, and you can see he's got a sash wrapped around, so he would play this on horseback. They had so many different calls that they could tell the people that were hunting what they were chasing. If it was a stag, how many points were on the antler, where it was, and who was also chasing. So it was signaling back and forth. And after the hunt, the master of the hunt, who was also the master of the dogs and horns, they would get together in the great hall for a banquet in the evening, and they would recreate in order the calls for the day. So it was almost like a 17th century instant replay, where you could hear the exact sequence of the way the hunt turned out. And so what did this instrument sound like? Well, here's a good example. Now, how do we know that's what it sounded like? Well, if you remember the last month that I talked about the oboe, I said we really didn't know how it was played, what it sounded like, because it had evolved over such a long time. The music has changed, the playing style has changed, but this instrument has not changed since the first, probably the 16th, 17th century. And its use has not changed. It still is used for the hunt. So that it's a tradition that has not lapsed. It has come down to modern times through the centuries. Now, one thing you notice that it only played a narrow range of notes. And this next clip gives you an idea of what the range of the instrument was. It's very wide at the bottom, very narrow at the top. Now, why is that? It's because of this. And this is a law of nature. It says for every vibrating string or column of air, the notes it produce follow a progression that's defined here. It's called the harmonic series. The lowest note for ease of visualization, I just chose 100, which is 100 cycles per second. So the fundamental is the length of that string there will produce a sound of 100 cycles per second. The other ones is the 200 is the next highest harmonic. And all the harmonics are integer multiples of the fundamental. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700. And these points right here are what are called the nodes. You can see that this frequency here is twice that, but the period is 1/2. So as the period, the frequency is the inverse of the period. So the period here is 1/3. The string is divided into threes, but the frequency is 3 times that. And here is what a violin would sound like if it played all the harmonics, and it conforms to this. The violin, you just touch the string. If you play it, but don't press the string down. If you just touch it and slide your finger up or down, either way, you would produce these nodes, which would then produce these frequencies. So here's what the violin would sound like, producing its wide range of harmonics. It's just the violin just lightly touching the string. And as I said, it's an arithmetic projection sequence the whole way to the top. Now, if I construct this, starting at 100 cycles per second, going up 16 steps, sounds like this. Again, it's like the horn, wide at the bottom, narrow at the top. And here's a horn, that same horn, transposed down to the 100 hertz. It's exactly the same. As I said, it's a law of nature. That's the way things work. Now, if our good piano tuner would tune this piano using that same sequence rather than the modern sequence, it would sound like this. It's kind of unusable for today's music, but again, that is the natural harmonic sequence. Now, don't be afraid. I'll explain what this is. What this essentially says is that for every fundamental frequency, that note contains all of those frequencies. All of those. It says that the fundamental, 1/1 is 1. We call that the fundamental. Is equal to the fundamental plus that period, in other words, that. So each note, the lowest note that we heard, actually contains all those frequencies. For example, we talked last month about the A on the oboe. Here's the A, 440 cycles per second. Its next harmonic is 2 times that, 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Now, if we looked at a frequency spectrum analyzer of that A on the oboe, there are those numbers, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these bands are intensity bands of the energy at that frequency. So it's 440 is the fundamental, times 2 times 3. You can see that's much brighter. So there's a lot more energy at 1320 cycles per second. Now here is the whole frequency spectrum of the oboe, of that A, the whole way up to 15 kilohertz, 15,000 cycles per second. And what we looked at was just the bottom 7. And you can see there's space here where they're not very bright. There's not a lot of energy there. More in this area, less in this area, but then more again up there. Now this is what this oboe A sounds like. Now let's listen to the trumpet A. Very similar, but what you notice, this is the spectrum analyzer of that trumpet note again. There's more intensity here, you see? More intensity in this area, less here, but more in the oboe. And it kind of goes away up there. So these harmonic bands is what gives each instrument its own particular timbre, its own particular sound. Now, if we want to look at another one, here's a recorder A. Kind of similar, but you see the harmonics above 3,000 almost go away. So that's what makes every instrument sound different. And as I said, they all, they all include all those multiples of harmonics. Okay, enough of the theory lesson now. There won't be a quiz at the end. So the horn, once it started appearing in concert, was played like that, bell up. The hand was not in the bell yet. And here's a modern player playing his horn. Now, for modern times, you've heard all those funky notes that were in there. Modern orchestras can't put up with that. So what they do in the modern players playing period instruments is they will drill a hole in the bore at those nodes. And the player would open that hole, and it would bring the note into tune, more from what we are accustomed to today. Here's another picture of horn players, horns, bells up. But I find this curious, this guy here, he's not paying attention to what's going on. He's looking at the woman over here in the window. That's typical horn players. Yeah. Okay, let's get back to those funky notes. What I want to do, I'm going to play this harmonic series again, and I want you to count from the bottom as you go through it. And when you hit 5, 7, 10, 11, 13, 14, you'll hear that it's a bit off. So, are you ready? Ready to count? 2, 3, 5, 7. Okay, you could hear where they're just kind of wonky a bit. Now, you say, well, how far? It doesn't sound too bad. How far off is it from a modern scale? Okay, I'm going to play. What I did was overlap that with a modern scale, and you'll be able to hear the differences in the pitches. So again, count. 3, 9. Now, the reason some of them don't sound off is because even multiples come into consonants. They aren't what we call out of tune. Let's hear that again and count. 2, 3, 4, 7, 10. So how did they get around that? How did in the period when they were playing bells up, how did they get around that? Well, they didn't. That was part of the character of the instrument, so they didn't try to change it. Hunting music that was interpolated into concert music was very prevalent in the 17th in the 18th century, especially in French opera when they wanted to talk about the hunt and things like that. And so I'm going to play, again, the first clip that I played of the hunting horn, and I want you to listen to that very last note. You know, it's halfway between a trill and a vibrato, but what I think that was meant to do was to help the horn carry. If you just had produced a nice da, you know, it wouldn't carry as much as this pulsating sound. And composers used that. Here is a piece by Jean Mouret. It's called the Symphonie de Chasse. And you can hear this wobbling, and you can hear the funky notes. So that's probably the way it sounded. I mean, they didn't try to bring the notes into tune to what our modern ears would call in tune. Bach used this same type of trills in his music too. Here is the opening of Cantata 100, and you can hear the same trills. So they didn't try to get around that, they used it. And Bach, in 1721, composed a set of concertos for the Margrave of Brandenburg. You know, as we know, the Brandenburg concertos. The first concerto is for 2 horns, 3 oboes, and strings. And what he did at the very beginning of that, he put actual hunting horn calls into the piece, because he knew the Margrave was a big huntsman. And he wanted to impress the Margrave with this kind of music. And if you hear it performed today on modern instruments, and they play it nice and mellowed out, but here's probably a little bit more of what it sounded like to the Margrave. Very rustic sounding, and it makes quite a bit different than you hear modern instruments play it. Now, I also talked about how the notes at the very top are very close together. So composers started to write way up in the stratosphere for these instruments, and that's a really high wire act, because these notes are so close together that it's very easy to shoot for one and get the other. Because all you're doing is relying on your lip muscle memory to get it. You don't have a hand in the bell, or you don't have valves, certainly. So here is part of the third movement of the Brandenburg, where the horn player just goes up to the stratosphere. So I have great respect for these horn players, because, I mean, that is really a high wire act. And don't ever look down on a horn player that misses a note, because it's really a tricky instrument to play. So the next development in the horn was that they found out if they brought the horn down, put the hand in the bell, They could modify pitches. They could mellow it out. It wasn't so raucous or loud. And they found that if you just covered the bell a little bit in the bore, you could actually lower the notes by a half a step. Now, if you took your hand and jammed it the whole way into the bell and stopped the note up, you could go up a half step. So now you could play a chromatic scale. You can hear the hand going in and out. And Mozart loved this type of playing, and he wrote 4 brilliant concertos for the horn. And here's a section from one of those concertos where it's very chromatic, and you can hear the hand going in and out. And that was a very pleasing sound to composers in that period. They weren't worried about the notes that sounded muffled, but it was an expression. It was expressive in the way that they liked. So, I mean, that solved the problem for one key. But what happens if you need to play in another key? Well, the horn players had all these tubings that they would take out, put in, take out, and put in, depending on what key you were in. So I love the ornamentation in that bell. It's really beautiful. So if you're playing in this one, you saw they call that the pigtail. That one's set up for high B flat horn. If you wanted to play another key, you would take out and put in the appropriate ones. And so you could get a wide range of keys from the very high to the very low. And here's an example of really screaming high horn parts. This is Haydn Symphony Number 48, the Maria Theresia. And then if you added more tubing, horn players, they have a funny joke about this. They say it takes a week for the sound to come out. There's so much tubing, it takes a week for the sound to come out. But this is in low B flat. And what I'm going to play for you is the opening to the Beethoven Fourth Symphony. And the lowest note that you will hear is the horn. And it's this note here. And that's quite a bit different from what we just heard. That's very low. I mean, it's the lowest pitch that you heard. Now, the slide system was clumsy. I mean, you had, every time the movement stopped, you had to wait for the horn players to change their slides. And I'm not kidding. This is what it looked like back in the horn section. They have these clips. They have all these slides. They have all their slides set up. And sometimes somebody would hit the stand, and it would sound like a wind chime back there. They would start flopping around and clanking into each other. But there were various methods to try to make it a little bit easier. You see all these pistons here. They would pull those out, and it would hook in the next series of tubing, so they could change pitches that way. Here's another one. All the coils are here, but you pull this slide in and out, and it would hook in the next series of keys. Here's another one. And here by far is the most bizarre. Looks like it was designed by Medusa. Right? And again, it had a slide here that you would pull it out and it would hook in these. But the interesting part is at the top, this is where this is called the receiver. For the mouthpiece, you had to change the mouthpiece into a different hole. C, D, E, F, G, A, So you had to do two things. You had to stick the mouthpiece in the right hole, and you had to pull that slide. But composers got around the limited number of notes. They started composing works with horns in two different keys. Mozart did it, Beethoven did it, Brahms did it all the time. You would have two horns in one key, two horns in another key, so that the notes that were maybe missing in one horn were picked up by the other one. Now remember, if you were here when I talked about the oboe, why it added keys. It was not for facility, it was for evening the sound out. So I want you to I'm going to place the Beethoven Eroica that gives you an idea of why they needed to even the sound out. I want you to listen to the very end, the rising scale in the horn. It's very even, goes right up. Well, a natural horn would sound like this. It's almost missing. That one note is almost missing. Here it is again. He had to jam the hand in to produce that note in tune, and it just weakened it. But a skilled player could, if it wasn't too loud, could make it sound like he was playing with valves. This is an excerpt from the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. You can still hear a little bit of that, but it's very even compared to the Eroica. So when did valves start coming in? This is an instrument, early 19th century instrument from France. That's when in the early part of the 19th century is when they started experimenting with valves. Now you see these things here. It looks like what you see on a trumpet valve, but it really isn't. It's just a metal rod going down this tube, and right here, these are the valves here. It's a rotary valve. It rotates and switches in the next set of tubing. This little crook here gives you a half step. This one here gives you a whole step. So you have a half step, a whole step. Put them both down, you have 1.5 steps. Here's another one. These are the regular piston valves like a trumpet would have. Goes up and down, and there are holes inside the piston that then would, again, switch in a half step and a whole step. They started also making completely removable valve systems for horns. So you can play your horn as a completely natural horn, or you can put in the valves and play it like that. And one of the first treatises on the horn from the early 19th century, the writer said, quote, "I have advanced that to want to prohibit all the stop notes of the horn, replacing them with open sounds, would be to inflict harm on the countenance of the instrument, and to make it lose its special character that gives it an indefinable charm." Brahms loved this indefinable charm. And the horn trio that we will hear today was written for a valveless horn. Just to give you an idea of what the two different ways sound like, here is a detail first played on the natural horn. You can hear the heat. Now on the modern horn, same thing. So you can see it evens it out, but the other one does have a charm to it that Brahms wanted, and that's why he wrote it for that instrument. Here's a modern horn. This is what our solos will be playing today, similar to this. Here are the 3 valves, and there's another valve that's worked with a thumb trigger. That hooks in a completely different horn in a different key in the back. There's a horn in F in the front, horn in B flat in the back. Well, why? Well, we talked about how close these notes are together up here, from the 12th to the 16th harmonic. If you play it on the B flat alto horn, they're down here in the 9th to the 12th. So the notes are actually further apart. You have less of a chance of hitting the wrong note if you're playing it in those harmonics. Now, I started the talk by saying that the harmonic series is a law of nature of all vibrating columns of air, including a garden hose. Does anybody recognize who this person is? Dennis Brain, very famous horn player in England in the 50s. There was a music festival called the Hoffnung Music Festival. It was a spoof festival, and so there is a concerto by Mozart's father for this instrument, the Alp horn. Again, I mean, it looks long, but again, they would have played way up high in the harmonic series to play the higher notes. So Dennis Brain comes out with this garden hose and a pair of garden shears and starts cutting the hose off to get it into tune. And he played this movement of this concerto. So that's it for today. Now you know all about the horn and the oboe, too, if you were here last month. So thank you for coming, and hope you enjoyed the concert. Thank you.